I always smile when my phone lights up with his name. It's almost automatic now, like a habit I taught myself to survive. "Hi, Mom," he says, and for a few seconds, everything feels normal again. I ask how work is going. He asks if I'm eating well. We talk about the weather, about traffic, about nothing important and yet everything important. While he speaks, I nod, even though he can't see me clearly. I smile, even when my chest feels tight. Because this is what mothers do, we make space, even when our own space is shrinking. When he was little, he used to run toward me instead of away. His problems were small then: a scraped knee, a bad dream, a forgotten homework assignment. Back then, my voice could fix everything. Back then, he needed me not just to talk, but to stay. I remember sitting on the edge of his bed at night, listening to his breathing slow as he fell asleep. I remember packing lunches, tying shoelaces, waiting in school parking lots longer than I needed to catch one more glimpse of him. I didn't know those moments were disappearing. No one tells you when something is happening for the last time. Now, when the call ends, the screen goes dark too quickly. The silence in the room returns faster than I'm ready for. I sit there for a moment, still holding the phone, still smiling, and then slowly the smile fades. Because somewhere between then and now, I stopped being the place he runs to and became the call he fits in. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. People grow up, lives get busy. That's what everyone says, and it's true. But there was a time when his calls didn't feel scheduled. They felt necessary. He used to call just to tell me small things. A joke he heard, a meal he liked, a problem he didn't know how to solve yet. Now, the calls come at the same time every week. Same day, same hour, as if I've been quietly placed into his calendar. He never sounds rushed, but he never sounds settled either. Like his mind is already somewhere else while he's talking to me. Sometimes I catch myself stretching the conversation, asking one more question, adding one more thought. Not because I have something important to say, but because I'm afraid of the silence that follows. I notice how rarely he asks about my days now, how quickly he moves past my answers. When I mention something personal, a long night, an ache, a worry, he listens politely, then gently redirects, not unkindly, just efficiently. There's no argument, no harsh words, nothing dramatic enough to point at and say, "That's when it changed." And maybe that's the hardest part, because when there's no moment to blame, you start blaming yourself. I wonder if I talk too much, if I hold on to memories longer than I should, if I've become something heavy without realizing it. So I adjust. I keep my stories shorter, my feelings lighter, my voice steadier. I tell myself, this is love now. This is what it looks like. But some nights, after the call ends, I sit in the quiet and wonder how distance can feel so close and still leave you feeling so far away. There was a time when I was the first to know everything, before anyone else, before decisions were made, before plans were final. Now, I hear about things after they've already settled into his life. A new routine, a new home, new people whose names I try to remember even when I know I'll rarely hear them again. I'm careful not to sound surprised when he mentions them, careful not to ask too many questions, because I've learned that curiosity can sound like intrusion, and love can be misunderstood as control. When he married, I told myself this was natural. A new family deserves its own space. And I meant it. I smiled at the wedding. I gave my blessings without hesitation. I stood back when everyone said, "This is how it should be." But no one warned me how quietly my place would change. I used to be part of his decisions. Now I'm informed. I used to be included. Now I'm updated. Sometimes, during our calls, I hear voices in the background. laughter that doesn't include me, moments happening without me, not intentionally, but completely. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't apologize. And I don't ask, because I don't want him to feel torn. I don't want to be the reason for discomfort. So I adjust again. I tell myself, this is what love looks like when children grow up. Still, there are moments, small, quiet ones, when I realize I'm no longer standing beside his life. I'm standing just outside of it. And I smiled through that realization too. I didn't disappear all at once. That would have been easier to notice. Instead, it happened slowly in ways that were easy to excuse. Plans were made without asking me. Decisions were shared after they were already finished. Important moments were mentioned casually, as if they hadn't once included me. I'd hear about a holiday they took, a celebration I wasn't invited to, a difficult moment I only learned about afterward. Each time, I told myself it was nothing personal. But repetition has a way of turning nothing into something heavy. I began to feel like a shadow in his life, still there, still attached, but no longer seen. During our calls, I noticed how often he multitasked, typing, walking, doing something else while talking to me. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound needy, so I laughed softly when he said, "Sorry, Mom, go on," even though I'd already forgotten what I was saying. Somewhere along the way, I stopped sharing things that mattered to me. I didn't want to interrupt his life with my feelings. It felt safer to be easy. Invisible people don't cause problems. Invisible people don't ask for space. And I became very good at being invisible. But invisibility has a cost. Because when no one sees you, you start wondering if you still exist the way you used to. I'd look at old photos not to miss the past, but to remind myself that I once mattered loudly. Now, I matter quietly. So quietly that sometimes, even I forget to listen to myself. The first time it happened, I almost missed it. It didn't sound like rejection. It sounded reasonable. I asked if I could visit, not for long, just a few days, just to see him, to feel close again. There was a pause on the line, a small one, but long enough for me to notice. Then he said, "This month is really busy. Maybe later?" His voice was kind, apologetic, even. I told him it was fine. Of course it was fine. I didn't want him to feel guilty. After we hung up, I sat with that pause for a long time. Because before, there was never a pause. There was never a maybe. There was always room for me. I told myself I was overthinking. People have lives. Schedules fill up. So when I asked again weeks later, I tried to sound casual, flexible, understanding. The answer was softer this time, but clearer. "We'll see." Those two words stayed with me longer than the call did. Not because they were cruel, but because they were careful. Careful enough to keep me hopeful, and distant enough to keep me out. That night, I replayed our conversation in my head. Wondered if I'd asked too much, if I'd crossed an invisible line. I decided not to ask again. Because when love begins to feel like a request, you learn quickly how to stop asking. And that was the moment I understood. He didn't push me away. He simply stopped pulling me closer. After that, something shifted inside me. Not in him and me. I stopped reaching out as often. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was tired of measuring my importance by his availability. Days passed without messages. Then weeks. When he finally called, I acted the same. Warm, calm, supportive. I never mentioned the silence, because silence, once noticed, becomes fragile. And I didn't want to be the one who broke it. I told myself I was giving him space, being mature, being understanding. But in truth, I was shrinking. I learned how to be okay with less conversation, less presence, less of myself. Sometimes I would see something during the day, a small detail, a memory, a thought, and my first instinct was still to share it with him. Then I would stop. I'd ask myself, is this important enough? Is this worth interrupting his life? Most of the time, the answer was no. And so the silence grew. Not loud, not obvious, just steady. It filled the spaces where laughter used to be, where questions used to live, where closeness once felt natural. Late at night, I'd scroll through old messages, not to relive them, but to remind myself that connection once existed without effort. Now, every word feels weighed, every call feels earned, and love feels careful. When silence becomes familiar, you stop expecting to be heard. You start teaching yourself how to disappear gently. It wasn't that I was told I couldn't come. I just wasn't thought of. I'd see photos later posted casually, without intention to hurt. A family gathering, a weekend trip, a celebration I didn't know was happening. He would mention it afterward, like an afterthought. Oh, we went away last weekend. It was last minute. Last minute for them. Too late for me. I smiled when he told me. I always do, because asking why feels dangerous, because sounding hurt feels like accusation, and I don't want to be that mother. So I listen, I nod, I say, that sounds nice. Inside, something tightens. I start learning the language of exclusion without rejection, how absence can exist without conflict, how distance can grow without a single argument. I notice how everyone else seems to know the rhythm of his life, his plans, his changes, his moments, and I'm always just one step behind, not pushed away, just left out. There are days I wonder if this is my fault, if I didn't step back enough, or if I stepped back too far. Because when you remove yourself quietly, people get used to the space you leave behind. And then one day, you realize no one notices you're missing anymore. That realization doesn't break you loudly. It settles, like dust. Once you've been quiet for long enough, your thoughts start turning inward. You stop asking what changed in them, and start asking what changed in you. I replay conversations in my mind, searching for mistakes, words I shouldn't have said, moments where I might have held on too tightly. I wonder if I was too present, too emotional, too available, or maybe not enough. I question whether my love became inconvenient, whether my concern sounded like criticism, whether my care felt like pressure. And the hardest part? There's no clear answer, no moment to point to and say, that's where I went wrong. So the doubt fills the gaps. I tell myself, maybe I expect too much. Maybe this distance is normal. Maybe this is what motherhood looks like when children grow up. I remind myself that he's not cruel, that he still calls, that he still says he loves me. And that makes my pain harder to explain. Because how do you grieve something that hasn't officially ended? How do you mourn a relationship that still exists, but feels thinner every day? I stand in front of the mirror sometimes, trying to see myself the way he sees me now. Not as the center, not as the first call, just someone safe, someone familiar, someone optional. And in those moments, I realize the most painful question isn't why did he change? It's when did I stop feeling important? There are moments when he says things that sound harmless. You worry too much, Mom. You're reading into it. Everything is fine. And maybe he believes that. But every time he says it, something inside me folds a little more. Because when your pain is dismissed gently, you start questioning whether it was real at all. I tell myself I'm being sensitive. I remind myself that intentions matter more than impact. Still, my feelings don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Sometimes, I try to explain how I feel carefully, softly, without blame. I choose my words the way you choose fragile glass. And he listens. He always listens. Then he reassures me that nothing has changed. And that's when I realize something I hadn't before. My reality and his are no longer the same. He experiences connection. I experience distance. He feels balanced. I feel erased. And because he isn't doing anything wrong, I have nothing to defend myself with. No evidence. No argument. Just a quiet ache that keeps getting renamed as imagination. That kind of pain is confusing. It makes you apologize for your feelings. It makes you soften your truth until it barely resembles itself. I find myself saying, I'm probably just overthinking. And each time I say it, I teach myself to doubt my own experience. Love hasn't disappeared. It's just been rewritten in smaller letters, in footnotes, in places I'm not meant to read too closely. The breaking point didn't arrive with tears or shouting. It came quietly, on an ordinary night, after an ordinary call. I sat alone on the edge of my bed, still holding my phone. Long after the screen had gone dark, the room fell to quiet, not peaceful, empty. I didn't cry right away. I stared at the wall, trying to name what I was feeling. Sadness didn't fit. Anger felt wrong. Loneliness came close, but even that wasn't complete. It felt more like something had finally settled into place, an understanding I hadn't wanted to accept. I realized I was grieving not because I'd lost my son, but because I'd lost my place. No one noticed the change. No one needed to. The world continued exactly as it was. I still answered calls with a steady voice, still asked about his life, still said, I'm fine, when he asked how I was. But something inside me had gone quiet, not broken, just tired. That night, I allowed myself to feel it without explaining it away, without fixing it, without blaming myself. I let the silence sit beside me, and for the first time, I admitted something I'd been avoiding. This pain didn't need permission to exist. It didn't need justification. It was real even if no one else could see it. I lay down eventually, eyes open in the dark, listening to my own breathing. And I understood then that some breakdowns don't look like falling apart. Some of them look like learning how to carry less, because carrying everything has finally become too heavy. Acceptance didn't arrive like relief. It arrived like resignation. Not dramatic, not hopeful, just as steady. I stopped waiting for things to go back to how they were. Stopped expecting more words, more time, more effort. Not because I stopped caring, but because I needed to stop hurting. I began adjusting my expectations quietly, the way you lower your voice in a room where no one is listening. I learned which topics to avoid, which questions not to ask, which hopes to keep to myself. I told myself this was maturity, that this was what letting go looked like. But letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying love without insisting on closeness. I still prayed for him every night. Still worried when I hadn't heard from him in a while. Still felt that familiar ache when I thought of him. Only now, I felt it alone. I accepted that I could no longer be the center of his life. And maybe I never was meant to be forever. What I hadn't accepted yet was how much of myself I'd given up in the process. Because when you accept being less important, you start believing you are less important. And that belief settles deep. Acceptance, I realized, is not always healing. Sometimes, it's just survival dressed up as strength. Nights are different now. They stretch. There's no schedule to distract me, no polite conversations to manage, no smile to hold in place, just quiet. I move through my evening routines slowly, washing dishes that don't need to be washed yet, straightening things that are already in order, anything to avoid sitting still, because when I sit, my thoughts find me. I think about the nights when he was small, when he needed water, or reassurance, or just the sound of my voice to fall asleep. Back then, nights felt full. Now, they feel hollow. I check my phone more often than I'd like to admit. Not expecting a message, just hoping. Hope is a stubborn thing. It lingers even after you've told yourself not to. Sometimes I imagine calling him, not to talk about anything important, just to hear him exist on the other end of the line. But I don't, because I don't want to feel like an interruption. So I sit with the quiet. I learn its shape, its weight. Loneliness isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the absence of small, ordinary connections, the kind you don't realize are keeping you grounded until they're gone. As the night deepens, I remind myself to breathe slowly, to be gentle with my thoughts. Tomorrow will come. It always does. But tonight belongs to the silence. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden moment of clarity, no dramatic realization, just a small shift, almost unnoticeable. One morning, I caught myself waiting for my phone to light up before starting my day, and I stopped. I realized how much of my emotional world had begun orbiting around his availability. That scared me, because before I was his mother, I was a whole person. I had dreams that had nothing to do with raising someone, thoughts that didn't need approval, a voice that existed even when no one was listening. I started doing small things again, not for distraction, but for myself. Long walks, quiet mornings, moments where I allowed myself to feel complete without explanation. I didn't love him any less. I just remembered that loving him didn't require losing myself. There's a difference between devotion and disappearance, and I had crossed that line without realizing it. I began speaking to myself more gently, replacing blame with understanding. This distance wasn't proof that I failed. It wasn't evidence that I was unlovable. It was simply change, and change doesn't get to define my worth. Some days are easier than others. Some days the ache returns without warning. But now, when it does, I remind myself of something important. I am still here, still whole, still worthy even in the quiet. Healing didn't come from answers. It came from stillness, from learning how to sit with my feelings without rushing to fix them, from allowing sadness to exist without treating it like a failure. I stopped asking why so often, not because the questions disappeared, but because I no longer needed them to move forward. I began turning inward in ways I hadn't before, spending time with my thoughts, listening to what my heart had been trying to say beneath the noise. I found comfort in simple rituals, early mornings, quiet prayers, slow breaths. There's something healing about placing your pain somewhere safe, somewhere it doesn't need to be defended. I learned that love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like release, not letting go of the person, but letting go of the expectation. I stopped measuring my value by how present I was in his life, and started measuring it by how present I was with myself. There are still moments when the old ache returns. It probably always will, but now it doesn't control me. I can hold both things at once: love and distance, care and boundaries, memory and acceptance. Healing, I realized, isn't about becoming untouched. It's about becoming steady. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, I want you to know something important. You are not weak for feeling this way. You are not failing because your heart still reaches for your child. Loving deeply was never a mistake. So many mothers carry this quiet pain without words for it. They smile in conversations. They say everything is fine, and they grieve silently for a closeness that changed without explanation. If this is you, please hear me. You are allowed to feel hurt without being dramatic. You are allowed to miss what once was without wanting to control what is. You are allowed to exist fully even when your role looks different now. Your worth does not shrink because your child's life grew. You did not raise them to abandon you, you raised them to live. And sometimes, that truth is both beautiful and painful at the same time. Don't punish yourself for loving longer than you were needed. That kind of love leaves a mark even if it isn't always acknowledged. Take care of your heart the way you once took care of theirs. With patience, with gentleness, with forgiveness. And remember this, you were a whole person before motherhood, and you are still a whole person now. There's a truth many of us avoid because it feels uncomfortable. Children grow into their own lives, and in doing so, they sometimes outgrow the roles we once played. That doesn't make them ungrateful, and it doesn't make us unnecessary. It simply means love changes shape. But here's the part we don't say enough. A mother's presence should never be treated as optional. Respect doesn't end with independence. Care doesn't disappear with adulthood. And emotional distance, even when unintentional, still leaves marks. We can hold to truths at once. Our children deserve full lives of their own, and mothers deserve to feel seen, included, and valued. One does not cancel out the other. The problem begins when silence replaces consideration, when busy becomes a habit instead of a season, when connection is reduced to obligation. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness, about remembering that the people who raised us still carry hearts that feel deeply even when they say nothing. And for mothers listening tonight, your love was never too much. Your presence was never a burden, and your pain does not need permission to be valid. Some truths are quiet, but that doesn't make them small. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for listening truly. Some stories aren't meant to be rushed. They're meant to be felt slowly, in the quiet moments when your guard is down. If this story sounded familiar, I hope it reminded you that you're not alone, that your feelings make sense, that silence doesn't mean insignificance. And if you're listening as a son or daughter, maybe this is your reminder too. Not to feel guilty, but to remember the voice that once calmed your fears, the presence that waited without asking, the love that didn't stop just because life became full. A message doesn't have to be long. A call doesn't have to fix anything. Sometimes, showing up is enough. If this story touched you, please consider liking this video. It helps these quiet stories reach other hearts that might need them tonight. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories told softly, honestly, without judgment, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Take care of yourself. Be gentle with your heart, and if you still can, call your mother.